Good morning, everybody. Today I'm going to be reacting to another Weebo Union video. Let's go.
So another update. In this one, I'll be covering the latest developments from the front line as well as the developments on the Wagner front by Belarus. Starting out, we have some territorial changes here in the south where the Ukrainian forces have managed to advance a tiny bit further towards the direction of Robotyne. However, this is actually very significant compared to the past open fields. This also includes some trench networks that the Russians were holding, and now the Ukrainians are in control of it. There is the video by Deep State Map that I'll not show as it contains infantry, and that usually doesn't go well with the YouTube monetization. But essentially, there are some Ukrainian infantry that have taken the trenches here to the northeast of Robotyne, and the Russian forces were shelling them. That's how we know that they are under Ukrainian control. So the Ukrainian forces are closing in on Robotyne and are actually facing the defenses before the village. So they are closing in on the village itself at a slow but steady pace. We see something similar here by the southeast of Pobieda, where there are some trenches here in the middle of the fields to the southwest of Alexandrivka and southeast of Pobieda, to the south of Marinka. This area here is filled with trenches and fortifications, and the Ukrainian forces have managed to recapture it after the Russian forces captured it. And this area has actually gone back and forth between the two sides a lot of times, more than I can count on one hand, so at least 5 times. So this is actually very interesting because we see the Ukrainian forces continuously pushing back the Russian forces, and the Russian forces continuously attempting to capture these fortifications here to the southeast of Pobieda, but they never truly hold on to it, which indicates that this is a very difficult area to hold on to despite the fortifications. And this is likely due to the importance of this area. If the Russian forces take control over it, they can launch offensive in the direction of Novomikhailivka as well as Pereskovivka here to the south, and they can also flank Pobieda. Meanwhile, if the Ukrainians continuously hold on to it, they can prevent that, and they can also potentially push in the direction of Alexandrivka or eastwards. And this is a heavily fortified area compared to some other areas. This is one of the areas that have been fortified since the civil war in the Donbass, so for at least 9 years. So there's a lot more fortifications here in comparison to other areas of the front line that are newer, like the Zaporizhia front and so on. So generally, this is a significant area. However, with how much fighting that has been going on in this area, there is doubt as to how effective the fortifications are now in comparison to years ago. Then we move on to the south of Klishchiivka, where the Ukrainian forces have managed to capture another crossing by the canal, and they also have this part here under their control. So they are straightening out the front line here to the south, and they're expanding the zone of control to the east of the canal. Something else is that it is reported that yesterday the Ukrainian forces entered Klishchiivka and almost took control over it, but a Russian counterattack essentially put the lines back to where they were. So this indicates that there is also very heavy fighting here by Klishchiivka, and as I've mentioned multiple times, Klishchiivka is the most important village to the south of Bakhmut, because capturing this for the Ukrainians would essentially mean an open field to the rest of the villages in the south of Bakhmut, as they would have significant advantages going forward. This is why the Russians are holding it at seemingly all costs. Which is when we move on to the next part, which is that the Wagner forces are training the whole Belarusian army. First off, the reports said that they were training the Belarusian special forces, but since then there's come a report that they're also training their territorial defense, as well as their conscripts, and seemingly also the rest of the Belarusian army. On top of that, we have received information from Remy that they are going to be 30,000 strong. On top of that, they are receiving reinforcements from the Wagner forces around in Africa, which would, according to Remy, mean they double up to 60,000 troops. If we combine that with the Belarusian army of about 80,000, that's 140,000. And if we assume that the Shoigu additional army of 160,000 is real, and you locate those at Belarus, then there would be a total of 300,000 troops. However, there's no guarantee that we'll locate them at Belarus, at the very least all of them. However, according to Remy, there is also a movement of Russian troops to Belarus on top of the Wagner forces. This indicates that the Russian forces definitely have an interest in gathering a large force in Belarus. Now, the question is, will this force be used to invade Ukraine from Belarus, similar to at the start of the invasion? So, according to Zelensky, that's a no. He released a statement according to Budanov. This is not the case, and Ukraine is safe from the north, regardless of the plans that the Russians have, but they will definitely not invade Ukraine from the north. So that is a very interesting statement. I don't know why he's so sure. Maybe he has some secret service intelligence that tells him for sure they won't invade us. Or either way, if the Russians decide, despite his statements, to invade from the north, then the Ukrainians will definitely be outmatched, since they do not have necessary forces to defend against 200,000 troops from the north, much less 300,000. So either way, if the Russians decide to invade from the north, the Ukrainian army will split into two, and they'll have to take care of both sides, and the Russian forces are already matching the Ukrainians in the south. If they then had to split their army in two to also defend the north, then the Ukrainians will most likely be outmanned on both sides. And that would generally be a very concerning development for the Ukrainian forces if they are to prepare for such an incursion. I know that they have placed a lot of mines across the whole northern front, especially on the northwestern parts in these different regions of Ukraine in the northwest. They have placed a lot of mines from the first months of the war after the Russian withdrawal from Kiev. They've started placing mines and building defenses in the north in case they returned from the northern front. Other than that, we see a general development that is a general trend across the whole front line, and that is whichever side is currently attacking, they are doing it at a very slow pace. And I believe the reason for this is that we see the developments that the defenses are mainly consisting of a lot of mines as well as trenches. So generally what each side needs to do is that they need to clear these mines and then assault the trenches with armored vehicles. However, the biggest issue is that most of Ukraine is open fields, so when they go through these open fields with tanks, they are easy targets for artillery, air force, anti-tank gun missiles and so on. So generally they take a lot of losses going through these minefields trying to clear the mines. Generally, the only solution I could come up with the current tactics and technology would be that you just need a large enough force. If you keep sending these smaller platoons with 12 tanks and 10 armored vehicles and so on, then they just end up getting all of them destroyed with a few small advancements, like we see south of Orikhiv. We see that they advance slowly bit by bit, but they take a lot of losses in that process. The same with the Russian forces elsewhere. When they try to just advance with a small platoon with like 10 to 12 tanks, they just end up getting stuck in these minefields. So generally, their main solution would be to accept you're going to take losses with these advancements. It comes at a cost. It's not a fairy tale where you just win without taking any losses. You'll definitely take losses. So rather than going at a slow pace bit by bit, where you take more losses in the long run, you just go one big push where you will break through the defenses and essentially go through this whole issue of minefields if you just clear enough in one go. Similar to the D-Day landings, the US and UK and Western allies powers, they knew they were going to take a lot of losses. They knew that the Germans had protected it well, they had built fortifications, and they had a lot of units there and all of these things. But they did it anyways because it was necessary. So this is essentially them saying it's not really necessary to go through these defenses, which doesn't make sense because Ukraine has announced that they want to take back the whole country. How can they take back the whole country without advancing? Same with the Russians. If they want peace, then they would need to end this war militarily. They've said so themselves. There's no negotiation. It will end in the battlefield. So this isn't really the way to end it. So the only solution would be to accept, yes, there will be casualties, so you need a large enough force so that despite the casualties, you can just go on. You don't need to stop because of the casualties and retreat like they do every time. We see every video, they go, take hits, take losses, and retreat. They There was a story from a Ukrainian soldier who had trained in the West from the 47th Mechanized Brigade, and he was doing some medevac. He was traveling on a Bradley tank, armored infantry fighting vehicle, and then they opened the ledge. He was going to retrieve one of the wounded soldiers. He jumps down into a pit where there's clearly been an explosion. He jumped there, assuming that since there has already been an explosion, there's probably nothing there. He jumps down, falls down on a mine, his leg gets blown off. This is exactly what we see through, like, his continuous story is that he's getting combined into a Bradley with 2 dead people and another wounded. There are 4 casualties in a Bradley being pulled back, and all of these casualties are just from mines. They didn't even see the opponent, and then they just retreat. Like, there's no point to just go in, get hit by mines, and then go out. Makes no sense, and it's just a waste of life. But that's going to be all for this update.
I hope you enjoyed it. This was an African reaction, and it seems like the counter offense is not going the way it's supposed to go. It's going quite slowly, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. Bye.